Okay, well, welcome everybody to this special session. Before we get going, I'd just like to say two things before I forget. Firstly, to inform everyone that this is being live streamed. And secondly, I'm reliably told that the hashtag for this event is youth politics. So tweet away to your heart's content. The second thing that I want to say is thank you to Jennifer Crisp, Lizzie Kirsch, and Eleanor Wolf for all of their efforts in organising today's events. Thank you very much indeed. So welcome to Birmingham. Welcome to this University of Birmingham event. My name is Tim Horton. I'm Reader in European Politics at the university in the Department of Political Science and International Studies. For my sins, I served for a couple of years as head of department. And when I was head of department in the run-up to this particular event, we decided that it was really important that we did something here as part of the fringe events. The university has a civic and a public mission that goes beyond its mission, its commitment to pushing back the frontiers of knowledge. And as a university, we have a particular interest in youth and politics because most people at the university, apart from some middle-aged people like me, tend to be on the younger side. Now, youth and politics, it's worth reflecting on a couple of broader things at the beginning. If we look at party membership, a recent Economic and Social Research Council funded project showed that only 5% of Conservative Party members were aged between 18 and 24, whereas 29% were aged between 65 and 74. But before you all think that that's a problem of the Conservatives, let me remind you that 4% of Labour members are between 18 and 24, 6% of Lib Dems, and just 5% of SNP's members. So this goes across the board. Moreover, if we look at participation in general elections, although there's a big debate within academia as to whether the 2017 election saw a youth quake or not, what we can say is that historically turnout amongst the young is generally pretty low. So why should we concern ourselves about this? Well, we're at a Conservative Party fringe event, so some of you may have your partisan hats on, and you might be reflecting on the experiences of Canterbury, for example, at the last general election. But more broadly, there are other concerns. Democracies work best when they aggregate interests, when they send strong signals from voters and from ordinary citizens to the political elites. Moreover, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that participation in politics, if it's begun very young, then people get into the habit of doing that for the remainder of their lives. But you didn't come here to listen to somebody the wrong side of 40 try to tell you how to engage young people in politics. I know there's a verb to mansplain. I'm not quite sure what is this to middle-age splain. How we engage young people in politics. So it's terrific that we've got four terrific, bright young people to share their thoughts about how to engage the youth in politics. And our four speakers, I'll introduce them in the order that they will speak. So firstly, to my right is Anna Humphries. She is the president of the Conservative Society at the University of Birmingham. Anna is a second-year student in our department, well, half in our department and half in history. Our second speaker is Jack Brereton, MP. Jack is the MP for Stoke-on-Trent South. He was elected first to that post in 2017 at the tender age of 26, having been previously a local councillor since 2011. And it's worth saying that Jack also studied the right thing at university. He studied politics at the University of Kiel. Our third speaker is a former student of mine, Ellis Palmer, who is a broadcast journalist with the BBC. He works for BBC World and BBC News, and he studied international politics and Hispanic studies at the University of Birmingham. And last but by no means least, we have Reese Roberts, who is the president of the Guild of Students at the University of Birmingham. And he is also a second-year student in our department. So we have a terrific panel with some terrific ideas. What we're going to do is give them all 5 minutes or so to share some initial reflections, and then we'll move as quickly as we can towards questions so that we can have a really lively, thoughtful, interesting debate. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Anna. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Tim. So I thought what I'd talk about today is kind of what got me into politics in the first place. You know, we talk about young people, it's mainly our age in the room. And I think three things sprung to mind when I thought about youth engagement. I thought about engagement through discussion on bases like this, on sort of one-to-one, small group discussion. I thought about the fact that we're a social media age and how we need to be using that as a tool for good. And then finally, I thought about the need to perhaps remove stereotypes for young people in politics. So I guess what got me into it in the first place was actually at my sixth form college, my local one, Stoke sixth form, and it began by choosing politics, government and politics, as my fourth A-level. I don't know if many of you struggled with picking a fourth, you know your three, it's the final one that's a struggle. And I chose to do that, and I realised that maybe I should be listening to the news a bit more, maybe I should be watching Question Time, maybe I should be becoming a bit more engaged. And I realised that I was very interested in kind of what the speakers had to say, not just MPs, but journalists, commentators, novelists. And I thought to myself, they want to hear my voice as well. And I think one thing my sixth form did very well was bring in speakers from multiple political backgrounds. We had our local MP at the time, Tristram Hunt. We had John Bercow, Speaker of the House. We had people from the BBC in from time to time. And I think what's created from perhaps not a young age, but a younger side of age, at 16 to 18, was a sense of discussion, a sense that, you know, in a classroom with about 12 students and one MP, you could begin to have that discussion, say, okay, this is my perception of politics and this is what I've enjoyed. And what was created in a way was a forum for discussion, a forum for our voice to be heard, one that perhaps you don't see on Prime Minister's Question Time, for example, which I don't know about you guys, but I feel has perhaps come a little more of infighting and sound bites rather than actual debated discussion. So the next thing that brings me on to that in a way is social media and politics. I'm a Conservative voter, proud to be one. You know, I'm proud to be the president of the Conservative Society on campus. But during the election, what I found is that instead of social media being that tool for discussion, that tool for debate, there was actually quite negative spins on politics. You know, I think, in a way, it comes into my last point as well, is about the stereotypes of politics. You know, if you're a Conservative, you're an older voter, you're in a suit, you know, you're probably middle class or upper class. If you're on the left, I don't know, but it feels to me that perhaps there was a lot of Corbyn and a lot of the idea that to be on the left, you're maybe a lot more vocal. You had the rise of momentum, which to me felt a little more aggressive in its style. I only speak from my personal opinion, of course. But I think, in a way, with social media and with things like news outlets, we have a real opportunity here to up the engagement, to up the level of debate that we have going on, not to throw around insults or create some sound bites or try and be relatable, but to just tell the truth to people our age, to be honest about the political situation, and whatever side of the spectrum you're on, increase debate. I know at the University of Birmingham, as the parties on campus or the societies, we have so much cross-party discussion. We're all in it together. And in a way to increase the youth vote and to increase youth engagement, if there is that cross-party discussion, if there's more coming together with people with similar views and then expanding that, I believe that's the way forward. And I think one thing I'd say about conference this year is the fringe events have been very, very popular. I have seen a lot of people my age at those, and I'm very looking forward to doing a couple more before it's over. So thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Straight over to Jack. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for inviting me to speak at this event. And it's great to see so many people turning up to the event organised by the University of Birmingham. I don't know exactly why you have invited me, but I suspect it is something to do with being the youngest Conservative Member of Parliament. But I would like to bring a little of my experience of being a young politician, but also of winning a seat that was held by Labour previously for 82 years. And in fact, actually, the average age of my constituency is above the national average, so it's around 43. But I do think there is that danger that we can treat young people as some alien group and that they're totally divorced from the rest of the population. And certainly from a Conservative point of view, I think that is very dangerous to try and sometimes separate out younger people completely from the rest of society. And I think there is often that temptation to treat all young people as being homogeneously left-wing and socialists, ardent Remainers. These are all things that have been associated with young people, and I actually find that often it's far from the case. If you look at YouGov reports, the numbers of young people who voted Conservative in 2017 was only 20% of those under 30s. But actually, if you go back to 2015, this figure was much higher, more like 50% of that age group voted for Conservatives. So I think we do sometimes, and really the worst mistake to make is that we treat young people's ideologies as being fixed, when actually it's quite far from the truth, and young people's views actually are changing, and in many cases they don't have a fixed political party. So if we look at the values of Conservatives, being aspirational, entrepreneurial, encouraging people from all backgrounds to achieve their best, and that the state should have a less intrusive role in our lives, I think those values relate very much to what young people are increasingly thinking in this country. And I often see older politicians, parties, other public bodies trying to reach young people simply by altering the medium of their messaging or developing policies to try and tempt young people in. And I think that's actually quite insulting to young people, to be doing that, and quite disingenuous to young people. Yes, we've got to appeal to a broad cross-section of society, but to promise things that actually, in reality, we can't ever deliver, I think that's very wrong. And you know, we should not be publishing on social media completely different, cringeworthy messages and hashtags to just try and grab the votes of young people. That is totally patronising to those young voters. So younger generations are probably more engaged than most ever before, actually. And with the barrage of different mediums for people to engage in modern politics, I think there are lots of opportunities through things like social media for young people to be engaged with politics. And actually, I think young people are probably more open to ideas, open to messages as a party, and how we get across those values and engage with young people is absolutely critical. As I've already identified, previous election results, young people are potentially less fixed to one party than, say, previous generations, and may shift quite quickly based on that appeal of that political party. But unfortunately, not all the messages, and not all the messages we put forward as a party in 2017 did land well with those younger audiences. You know, we need to recognise that as a Conservative Party, that they were not necessarily presented in the right way. And I just want to refer to the Nobel Prize winning behavioural economicist Daniel Kahneman, who found that people are a lot more likely to believe in or trust a statement or position if it fits to a vivid story already in somebody's mind, more so than a result of basic reason. So, as an example from a Conservative point of view, arguing that Labour's economic policies would take us back to the winter of discontent is, of course, much more likely to relate to those who've actually lived through that than someone born in the 80s or 90s. So just as for young people being told to work hard and save for a deposit on a house, which they can never actually see will be in reach or be able to make that opportunity, that questions the status quo and causes young people to actually question the status quo. So it's essential that we show, through Conservative policies, through capitalism, through the values which we stand by as Conservatives, that we will benefit them and the wider population in general. Otherwise, we risk losing touch with those voters and risk the current economic success we've achieved since Labour's recession being reversed. And I believe that politicians advocating bold ideas which fit within their principles will do most to engage with those young people into politics. Now, the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn has set out a series of bold policies, but these would cause immense damage to young people, the old, and everyone in between. So, of course, we need to show up those policies, but we also need to advocate our bold views as Conservatives, and I recognise the vision that we need to put forward as a prosperous future, not just for the occasional initiative here and there, or the sparkly window dressing on social media, but a consistent message about what our Britain will look like in the future and what our Britain will mean for young people across the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Always good to hear a reference to Daniel Kahneman's. His great book, Thinking Fast and Slow, I'd recommend it to everybody. And read it slowly, because it's worth reading slowly. But anyway, we will move straight over to Ellis.
Hello there, guys. How are you doing? As Tim mentioned, I'm a Brum alum. I graduated in 2016. I studied Hispanic Studies and Political Science at Birmingham, and then went over to Barcelona and did my Masters in Nationalism and Current Democracies in the same year as Brexit and Trump. As you can say, it was interesting. I've done the millennial equivalent of writing my notes on the back of a fag packet. I've got them in my smartphone app here. Unlike anybody on panel, I've not actually prepped any remarks, so I'm just going to talk things for 5 minutes. Right, so I grew up on Merseyside in Northern England, and there's always been a bit of a sense of alienation when it comes to news and politics in general, because politicians didn't look like me, they didn't sound like me, they didn't come from where I come from, they didn't have the same life path that I'd have. They're all Oxford or Cambridge types or that sort of thing. And I think that's something that's quite significant for a lot of young people, is that our politicians, and yeah, not just politicians, but also people who head up NGOs, are not relatable enough for young people. So, as I say, I had a fantastic 4 years at Birmingham. I really enjoyed it. I then went over to Barcelona, and the really interesting thing about Barcelona is everybody was so passionate about politics over there in a way that I hadn't really seen growing up in England, and that people were not passionate about single issues in quite the same way. There was a lot of passion on things like everything from feminism to, the gentrification of the city to the Catalan independence movement, which is really quite interesting. Which brings me to my next point, which is about news and fake news and the content that's out there. And actually, a lot of the time, we don't make enough of our news relatable for young people. Hands up, who knows what Checkers is? I certainly don't, and I wouldn't be able to explain it over a pint to any of you, because I think it's too complex for a lot of people to get into. And I think actually just referring to the Checkers deal, on BBC News or online or whatever, turns a lot of people off, because a lot of people don't know what it is. And that's part of the problem, is that our news and our news agenda isn't relatable to people out there. It doesn't reflect what people out there want to know. And, I would say my biggest challenge when I go in and write the news every morning is, how do I make this accessible to the people I grew up with, to my family members, to my mum and my grandmother? How do we bust the jargon, almost in many ways? And I think that's part of the problem all too often for younger audiences. And news content and media content in general is, oh, look at what the Kardashians did, oh, look at what happened to Caitlyn Jenner, or whatever. And actually young people like those stories, they'll click on them. But actually, what young people are interested in are social issues. I think Jack's alluded to it, and I think Anna did as well, is that young people are rejecting traditional institutional perspectives, if you like. As Jack said, a lot of them are floating voters, to use the political phrase. A lot of them don't have a set political ideology or a set political opposition. And actually, rather than young people being interested in institutions, you've got young people who are actually interested in social issues. So things like gentrification or women's rights or LGBT rights or disability rights or something like that. And I think for a lot of young people, the personal is political, you know. And I think that's something that's quite fundamentally important that I actually think sometimes political parties forget. As a disabled person, my disability affects my life in a lot of ways, and it certainly affects my outlook on issues, from everything from, you know, Jack talked about housing as a young person and a lot of the things around that, but imagine trying to find housing as a disabled person. It's even more difficult. And the accessibility of housing, the housing market is a bit of a nightmare. Even when there are new builds going up, they're not necessarily accessible. Things like transport, trying to get around our cities, or even trying to get here, or, you know, trying to access the streets to go out at night or anything like that is a nightmare. But transport more broadly, you know, buses and trains not being accessible, having to really plan ahead has a really fundamental impact. I mean, things like access to the workplace, because oftentimes, as a disabled person, you know, it's very, very difficult to overcome a lot of the societal stigmas that exist. And actually, and I think stigma is a big issue for a lot of young people, whether it's LGBT, whether it's young people of colour, whether they're disabled, you know, whether they're women, whatever. The stigma and the stereotypes that are associated with a lot of this stuff is fundamentally quite negative. But actually, you know, access to the workplace and access to actually be a productive citizen, I think, is something that, you know, we need young people in society to be able to be productive citizens. About things like education, making sure our universities and schools, and not just universities, by the way, but actually technical universities, I think, are something that's fundamentally quite important. And allowing young people to have the flexibility to study part-time if they want to, or something like that, to allow people who wouldn't necessarily be engaged in the education system to be engaged in the education system. Anyway, I digress. On to our next speaker.
Okay. Thank you, Ellis. We'll move straight over to Reese.
Cool. It's always a little bit harder having closing remarks, so I'm going to start off with a little confession. I'm not a Conservative. I'm really sorry. Up until last year, I was a member of the Scottish National Party, as you can hear by my accent, but I left. And I left because young people don't trust democracy. The people who are older than us, the Theresa Mays, the Jeremy Corbyns, the Blairs, the Jim Murphy, who is the MP in my constituency, have ruined the trust for young people. And I find the question of engagement quite patronising, because older people say to us, engagement is taking part in voting. I would completely and utterly say that is crap. Engagement is not voting, because there's two elements to engaging. There is emotive and there is cognitive. Cognitive is taking part in your party, is going out and voting. And then emotive is going down to the pub and having a chat about politics, or taking part, as I did at university, in debating with my Conservative friends, my Labour friends, my Lib Dem friends, my Socialist, Greens and UKIPers as well, is debating with them. But yet, we're seeing this shift, and I would argue that this shift of cognitive being just party, of just going out and voting, is absolute rubbish. Who is to say that voting is the only way to engage in politics? Engaging in politics at UOB is the 80 hours our students do volunteering and helping refugees and asylum seekers, something which they don't see as political, which is completely political. Going out and volunteering and earning £250,000 for local and national charities, something not seen as political, is overtly political. But there are the students that think that they're not political and that they can't take part in politics. I would say that the student that posts a tweet online about Mogmentum or Momentum, no matter what you like, is political. That is engagement. Just because you don't go out and vote, I see this question as being quite patronising to young people. And what I see as well is I'm someone that's engaged in politics. I'm my SU president. Anna heads the Conservative Society. Asking us about engagement is just is preaching to the converted. We already engage. We already go out and vote. We already force our friends to go out and vote. Why are we not asking the people that are not disengaged, that is a terminology I hate, who are not hard to reach, but are underrepresented? Young people are underrepresented, not hard to reach or disengaged. Anyway, I digress. Young people want to change the world. This is what we've been talking about. But they can't change the world because the Westminster system of doing it is broken. The only people that can change the world are the people that have a degree from Oxford, Edinburgh, or Cambridge, or someone that can afford to go far in a party. In 2017, for the first time, we actually saw parties taking interest in young people. We were taking away from the high politics about tax, the economy and pensions, but we were finally talking about what will matter in the future: housing, Brexit, and finally, tuition fees. Yes, the Labour Party got it wrong, but yes, the Conservatives got it wrong because the party system is broken. Anyway, at 16 years old, I voted in the Scottish referendum. I started off being in favour for the union, and I ended up leaving that side thinking in favour of separation. Only because I was able to engage in those conversations in schools. It was completely and utterly contested in Scottish councils about having this debate about the Scottish referendum. But my council, like many other, made the decision to allow students to engage on the basis that both sides would be listened to. And I can remember quite clearly my French teacher at the end of the day going, I have 20 minutes of the rest of my lessons, ask me questions. Those were the questions when we talked about oil, when we talked about these high political questions that I just didn't get. I knew nothing about the pound sterling or keeping it a hold of. But it was those people, my teachers, the people that I looked up to, were the people that educated me. And I see that, one, schools should be able to have and facilitate those discussions. Schools are too scared to, because you have the Conservatives saying that they're going to indoctrinate, but you also have Labour saying that they're going to indoctrinate. Both sides politicising the question. But then also, why can't 16-year-olds vote? Austria do it. The Scottish government do it at both a council level and a Scottish parliamentary level. Why? Because the younger generation are clued up. If you give them the springboard, they will jump and they will engage themselves. And the highest voter turnouts now in Scottish elections are 18 to 24-year-olds, those who were 16 to 18 at the time of the Scottish referendum. So really, what will I say about engagement? We can sit here and we can chat about with some of the most engaged people in politics, but actually, let's facilitate the conversation down at a local school level. Let's put trust. It was Ruth Davidson that hated giving votes to 16-year-olds, but after when the Scottish Government went to vote on giving 16 to 18-year-olds the power to vote, said that she was a part of the fan club now because she believed that putting trust in young people was the best thing to do. So really, that's kind of what I leave on. The system is broken. Young people don't trust politicians. So this Labour trying to pull and talk about tuition fees and lie, or the Conservatives saying that they're trying to rebrand their messaging, will not work. The institution is broken. You cannot see physical representation at a parliamentary level. It's time to change the system. It's time to trust our young people. It's time to actually give politics to the younger people and get them engaged that way. Thank you.
Well, thank you for four nice, provocative contributions, which is what we like in a university, to debate things, to think the unthinkable sometimes is important. So we have a good 45 minutes for Q&A. So do we have the first question? I think, Amina, you wanted to ask the first question.
Hi, thank you for inviting us. My question to you is, do you feel the current political landscape does enough to engage the youth, and what measures can be put into place to encourage and empower young people?
Okay, so what we're going to do with the questions is to try to get as many as possible. We will take them individually for a number of reasons, but I will just quickly ask the panellists to comment. You don't feel you have to comment on every single question. Ellis?
I think how can we engage people? It's about going to people where they are and how they are, and actually in the format that they're in. So it's things like, so much of the time we finick around TV programmes and, should we do TV programmes, or should we do TV news for young people or something like that? When actually, no, that's not the right format, that's not the right approach. You know, YouTube or Instagram or something like that is a much better platform to engage young people. And actually, I think that's part of the problem, but our politicians, our political elites, our media, still haven't got to grips with the fact that young people want their news, they want their current affairs in a different format to previous generations. They're not going to accept it in the same wrapping paper. You know, we've all got various iterations of these smartphones, we've all got the power to gain information. We've all got the power to have the information at our fingertips and use it in a different way, in a way that previous generations didn't necessarily have. And I think that's something that's fundamentally quite important. You know, when I was growing up, there wasn't, you know, the Twitter or the Facebook or something like that. There wasn't the power of information that exists these days, both for journalists and for consumers.
Thank you. Anna?
Yeah, I think the political landscape as it is now, in recent months and recent years, we have seen that it is changing about how we respond ourselves to politics. But I think probably the main way to engage is going off what Ellis said. It's about coming to us in a way. But at the same time, we can't expect everyone to just come to young people. We've got to go to people as well. And I think, yeah, actually we do read the news. I don't know about you guys, but who's got the BBC News app, the Times, the Telegraph, the Guardian on their phone and stuff like that? We are getting it straight to us through technology. I think it's whether or not we take notice of that as well. But I think, yeah, if there is going to be more engagement, there needs to be discussions on both sides. And I think, just going back to one thing that Reese said in his speech, which relates into this, is about sort of like patronising and how actually, yeah, maybe coming to us as politically engaged students isn't the right idea, but I'd have to disagree because all of us here have a duty ourselves to go and engage our friends, you know, over a coffee, bring it up, talk about it. And I think if we do more of that, we do empower people to speak about it more. Because I only got involved because of my friends in a way and because of the environment that was presented to me. And I think that's probably similar for quite a few people in this room. So why aren't we taking that and running with it in a sense?
Well, I think I agree with a number of points that have been made, and I think there are more opportunities than, as I said in my speech, more opportunities than ever before to engage politically. And I didn't entirely agree with a lot of what Reese said, but I did agree with the point about the fact that young people have those opportunities to engage, and it's not just about voting, it's about right across the board, everyday activities, you know, whether you're helping out in your community, on social media or whatever, that is engaging in our democracy, in our political system. And I would encourage more young people to join political parties, get involved, stand as a council candidate. You know, there's lots of opportunities for young people to get involved. And certainly somebody who didn't go to Oxford and Cambridge, you know, I think there is this misconception sometimes that all politicians are distant, that they're not somebody who we can relate to. Well, I think we do need to see a broader range of people getting involved in our politics, standing as candidates, representing communities right across the country, because until we have a broader range of both young and old, more women involved, more ethnic minority candidates, we're not going to get a true representation unless we can have that broad diversity of people getting involved and standing as candidates. So, you know, I think I don't think our democracy is broken, but it is down to all you and everybody out there to get involved and to be involved in our democracy, because it is through our actions on a daily basis which brings our democracy alive, and how we preserve our democracy, because our democracy is actually very valuable. If you look around the world, many countries don't have the rights that we have in the UK. So it's important that we continue to practice those rights and enjoy those rights. Otherwise, you know, they can be threatened.
Thank you. Reese?
I'll get back to the crux of your question, which is actually engaging in politics. And I will probably say this now, where I think my biggest regret was probably in getting involved in a party too early and pigeonholing myself, and then not actually, because engagement is a developmental process. You don't just become engaged and that's it. You'll be SNP, be Conservative, be Labour for the rest of your life. And I think it's been points that have been touched on that the party, nobody really follows the party system anymore, especially when you're younger, because engagement is about exploring what actually is important to you. Now, if the economy is important to you, that's absolutely fine. If your job security is really important to you, that's absolutely fine. But if your tuition fees are important to you, that's absolutely fine. But that's the whole point of politics. It's a point of engagement. So I wouldn't say be a councillor yet. If you want to be a Conservative, Labour or SNP councillor, that's absolutely fine. But only do it once when you've explored what politics is. And that's why I say engagement should be done through the classroom. This group of students said that they don't have a politics class in their school. The thing that got me into politics was modern studies, which is the equivalent in Scotland. And that was the thing that got me passionate interest in questioning the world around me, because I only took my parents' views of what politics was as gospel, which was completely wrong, may I say. So really, I would say it's ensuring that those opportunities, like you've said, are there to engage, but also that you're trusted and you're not patronised, because I feel sometimes people older in all spectrums of the political world patronise, saying that young people don't know enough information, whether they're 25 or 16, don't seem to know about the world, don't have the worldly experience, as I keep being told sometimes. So you do have the worldly experience, but you're still developing, you're still coming to your own conclusions. So just make mistakes, question, have chats with all your friends. Like, that's the best way I would say engage with politics.
Okay, thank you. We'll take this gentleman here first. Yes.
Thanks for your.
Wait for a second, microphone.
Oh, yep, sorry.
Cool. Thanks for all your comments and insights so far. So I'm Dominic. I work at the International Citizen Service, which is a government-funded international youth volunteering programme. And one of the aspects of it, once volunteers return, is to be active citizens and engage in all the ways that Reese talked about. So I was just wondering what you think about government programmes and the touch points that young people have with government programmes like that, encouraging youth participation like we're talking about.
Very good. Just a quick point. I can see that quite a lot of people want to ask questions, so my request for the panellists is to keep your comments brief, and to the audience to keep your questions brief, so everyone can have a chance to engage. So should we go the other way around this time? Reese?
Yeah. I think it's great that government gets people involved. I believe peer-to-peer is really important. You learn a lot from your peers, so I think it should be more accessible, these sort of government streams, whether it be the British Youth Council, Scottish Youth Parliament, British Parliament, all those sort of things should be accessible to all students, because it's a great way of then taking that knowledge back and then facilitating those conversations on a more peer-to-peer basis. That stuff I can get really behind.
I think our young people do some fantastic work volunteering, fantastic work you're doing yourselves in encouraging more people to participate actively in our communities. And I've seen recently some of the work that things like NCS have been doing, because they have been doing some really excellent work to try and get more young people involved in our communities, and that is just so valuable for not just for those communities but for those young people as well.
Hannah?
Yeah, one thing I'd say is that we need to hear more about these certain things. I haven't really heard much about your organisation, I'm sorry. I wish I had, because it sounds fantastic, but I think this is where being vocal really comes into it. And I think if there was maybe a bit more of push by all governments, whenever they are, to talk about these things, to discuss them a bit more widely, it will really up the accessibility and show that, yeah, even though voting, that's where it gets changed, perhaps on a government institutional basis, but you're right, it does happen there and then, and that is the way to feed people into that. So yeah.
Same as Anna, to be honest with you, mate, and of the organisation. I'm sure it does wonderful work. I think fundamentally, though, a lot of the time it's about people going out and informing themselves about the world with the information they've got to hand, and actually empowering people in the community where they are to actually have these debates, rather than a top-down approach through some government quango or some NGO or whatever. Actually giving people the power to inform themselves is something that's fundamentally quite important. I still don't think we've reached that point yet, really.
Okay, thank you. This gentleman there in the white shirt. Yes, 4 rows back.
Thank you. My name's Grant. I'm from North East Bedfordshire. I don't really have a question, more of a comment on what Reese said in his speech. And rather controversially, perhaps, I'm not actually a big fan of getting more young people, particularly into Westminster. I was wondering what your thoughts are, because suppose we had a lot more young people going into Westminster who don't have that proper life experience, have never built something in the private sector. No offence, Jack, you're doing a really good job. The worry is, do you not end up with, in say 15 years' time, a whole generation of career politicians who have not actually accomplished anything elsewhere?
I think I'm going to have to agree with my Conservative counterpart. I completely and utterly disagree. Who's to say that the life experience of someone that's 50 years old is much more beneficial than someone that's 25? The whole point of democracy, we live in a representative democracy. So if you don't have our younger MPs, then it's not representative, because we have younger people in society. You need to remember, I think it's, 27% of our population is children. Now, we're not saying let's shove a 5-year-old into Parliament, but where do you class young and what do you class as life experience? Because that's when you start going back to the olden days of a middle-class education and a middle-class sort of background. It's the best way of representing people. You can't tell people what they want. If a 19-year-old gets elected as an MP, then a 19-year-old gets elected as an MP. They've done it on their own merit.
If we had your argument, all of our MPs would be in their 80s and 90s, and I think people would not want to see that. But certainly, I think youth is an advantage. Certainly, my schedule is quite heavy, and having that youth on my side is particularly important. So I would encourage more young people to be involved in our democracy, because the wider variety of views that we have, the better our democracy will be. The better quality those decisions that we make will be.
Yeah, I think I'd just briefly say that life's about balance. We don't want loads of young people in Parliament. We don't want loads of older people in Parliament. What we need is a decent mix of both. We do have a lot more older MPs in at the moment, and I would say that they do have a lot more life experience than me. And I think that in a way is a good thing, but we do need more younger people there. And I think, yeah, you're right, you can have a lot of experience at 19 as a youth councillor. It's about your own personal experience. But my personal opinion would be, what's wrong with ensuring that there's a balance between young and old MPs alike? Because I'd prefer someone to be in a position of power who's had experience of an industry, who's been in it themselves. And I think that that's something that people take for granted. But yes, we do need to get young people in, but don't just kick other people out who have spent their whole lives on this, basically.
Ellis?
As a 24-year-old who writes the news every day, there's points I'm weak on, like who was the Italian Prime Minister 25 years ago, than some of my colleagues, but there's actually points I'm a lot stronger on, like LGBT issues, or social issues, or gentrification. And actually in our parliaments, in our governmental bodies, and in our news organisations, it's about having representation. It's about having all groups represented. So not just people from London or home counties, but people from the north. Not just old people or young people, but all bits of the population. And I think, sticking Parliament with young people maybe isn't the best idea, but fundamentally you've got to have representative democratic organisations that actually, are stocked by the people who they aim to serve. And certainly on things like higher education policy, younger people have probably got a lot more knowledge than, say, older people on those issues, and having that relatability, I think, is something that's quite important.
Thank you. I think this gentleman.
David Shipley, one of those middle-aged, middle-class Tories, but in my defence, I went to Birmingham rather than Oxbridge. We've heard from a few of the speakers that young people's political views are sort of, in many ways, nascent, changeable, are growing, developing, not fixed. Isn't that quite a strong argument against lowering the voting age?
I remember when I walked into my A-level politics class on the first day, and we were talking about political parties and single-issue campaigns. And it was almost as if young people were interested in these single-issue campaigns. I don't actually think young people are interested in single-issue campaigns. I think they're interested in issues rather than institutions. In the same way, I don't necessarily think young people sign up to a broad political parties, or people in general, people out there, people who aren't in political parties, people who aren't in these institutions, aren't signed up to a certain platform or another. Actually, they're much, their views are much more changeable. They're much more interested in issues rather than institutions. They're not necessarily interested in, say, rail nationalisation. Their main interest is housing. They're not interested in Brexit. Their main interest is refugee policy. It's about understanding that thing a lot of the time. And that's, for me, particularly growing up, one of the big issues was actually having to sign up to whole political parties' platform was something that as a young person I was deeply uncomfortable with.
Hannah?
I think going back to the whole lowering the voting age and about fluidity of voting, it's quite a difficult one, because at 16 I wouldn't have called myself very politically aware, And I think that's for quite a lot of people. It's not for everyone, I know that. But I think, I said earlier, the reason I got into it was because of A-levels and education, and I do stress that I think there should be more in education about voting. And I think Ellis has got a good point about being fluid on social issues and things like that, but we also know our own minds. We're not going to change it with the wind, but I think we will change it if a party perhaps one time is on our side and at the next minute isn't. I mean, one thing I'll say about Jeremy Corbyn and his ability to kind of sway votes his way was on student fees in a big way, but he did actually lie to us. He did.
Yes.
What he said was that he was going to get rid of our student debt entirely. Now, I took the mind of that's not a possible thing to do economically. It's not going to work. I don't like it being as high as it is, but necessary evils in a way. And I think if you did lower the voting age, you do... I find this quite difficult because when I was 11 days short of voting in the referendum, I was so annoyed. But then when I think about actually voting for, you know, a member of parliament at the age of 16, do I worry that perhaps we could get swayed by a political statement? Yes, because, you know, you hear what you want to hear in politics. You sometimes don't hear what you have to hear. And I think that is a danger, and I think perhaps in a way you're right.
Okay, thank you. Jack?
Yeah, I tend to agree with what Anna said, actually. I think, you know, a lot of people at the age of 16 are actually very mature and have strong views about things, but that's not the case for all 16-year-olds. And I think, you know, the age of 18 has always been seen as that's when people reach adulthood, and many of you know, things you get entitled to when you become 18. So, you know, I think you've always got to have that cut-off somewhere, whether it be, you know, 16 or 18. And my view is that it currently at 18 is probably the right balance to set.
I would argue then, on your point, would we stop 35-year-olds and unders voting? Because there's the argument that you start off voting Labour and then you move to Conservative. My mum being an example who started off voting Labour and then moved to Conservative. I would say that people do change. Views are fluid. People are no longer following the party system. We see that with the fact that membership in every party has collapsed. We now vote on issues. We vote on things that sway us. And I think what I want to echo there is that education is key. When you're 18 plus, you're outside the educational loop, and so you're making those views on yourself. My mum started off as a single mum, and then as she met her boyfriend and had a more secure life and a well-paid job, she went Conservative. That's absolutely fine. I respect her for that. But at a younger age, I think there needs to be an institutional push of educating young people in politics, not in one side or the other, but in a non-biased, non-partisan view of how to engage in politics. But I would just say, to your point, let's stop under 35-year-olds voting then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Layla, and based off of what Mr. Ellis Palmer said, you said that there's a lot of jargon. So the most knowledge which young people have is stuff that Corbyn says, like Anna, you said about fees and everything. We have no knowledge of tax and all those kind of extracurricular stuff which we don't really learn about. So how could we make it simpler and in simpler terms so we can gain more knowledge? And is the education system failing us for not letting us have this knowledge in the first place?
Okay. Shall we go with Reese first?
I would argue that politicians are failing. And have you seen the BBC video that is people yammering going, but we need Brexit? Like, and they're like, what is Brexit? And they go, well, we want Brexit. Brexit's Brexit. And Brexit is this multi-layered thing that has 101 different possibilities. No one knows what Brexit truly is. And I would say it's not the educational system, because I bloody don't know what Brexit is. I don't know what Chequers is. And sometimes I don't even know what the UK as a union is, because it's complex. But politicians use big P political words. They use language which is hard to understand and it's hard to disseminate. And we rely on things like simple politics, Channel 4 fact checkers in order to be able to understand. So I would say it's the politicians that need to realise that not everyone knows what these big complex words is. It's time to break it down, make it simpler. But the education system is trying, so simple facts in Channel 4, but they will find it difficult to break this complex ideas down into simple, plain English.
I don't think it's surprising that I'm going to disagree with you, but I think, and possibly I might upset Alice, but I think the media have a big role to play in this as well. I mean, it is very difficult to communicate when the media don't want to report some of the more boring things that are actually factual. And, you know, if we look at the attention that Boris is having, you know, that is not, you know, helping the political situation or helping people understand Brexit or whatever else more, but it is something that sells some papers, it gets people clicking on their apps and their websites, and unfortunately, a huge amount of the stuff that we read and we absorb through the media is actually not true. And, you know, that is very misleading, unfortunately, that we have some media outlets in this country that do not really reflect what is going on. And this is something that, you know, I do feel for a lot of, not just young people, but the whole of the wider population, that what do you actually believe? And Brexit has been a classic example of this. What do you believe? And Alice mentioned about Chequers. I think if we asked some of the things that are in Chequers and asked the audience to name actually what is actually in Chequers, I don't think many of the audience would actually be able to say what is actually in the white paper. Because yes, people have said, oh, we don't like Chequers, but very few have had the information from the media about actually what does that mean.
Can I just clarify the question? Is that all right? Was it about kind of education and simplifying
Yeah,
what we
is that
know?
how to simplify what the politicians say so that we can gain more understanding, and whether it's the education system's fault that we don't know enough?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one with the education system because we don't want to be spoon-fed. We don't want them to give it all of it on a plate. But at the same time, you mentioned things about taxation and things like that. Now, I wouldn't know where to start on some of that stuff, I'll be honest. I've picked up what I have through the news, through things like Simple Politics on Facebook. And I think you're right that maybe in education we need more basic information about like how we get a house for the first time, how a mortgage works. There definitely could be more things like that. I think in terms of educating ourselves about politics, is that comes from being taught those basics that you yourself have mentioned and I have as well, is that if we know things like about how the economy works in a sense, and just, I know it sounds stupid, but the world in general, how some of it works, I think we'll be able to form our own views so much better. And that comes from the media as well, is that then we'll be able to actually cut through the noise. I don't really want to see pictures of Boris running through fields of wheat. I want Chequers explained properly and simplified for me, and I want to know what's going on. And I think you're right. I think in a way education is perhaps failing us, but not in the way people think. It's not about saying this is what a party offers and this is what they're saying. It's about going, okay, so if we look at the economy, this is how it works. If we look at social issues, these are some of the options. It's not saying this is what a party offers because that will change tomorrow. So it's just about getting those basics in.
As a journalist, I'm frequently up at 3:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, and you know that can be a challenge at times, but it's necessary. It's necessary to take stock, to have my cereal, eat my breakfast, and go, what actually is this news? And take it slowly. Take the news slowly, step by step. So what has happened with Donald Trump? How does this connect to the last thing that happened with Donald Trump? Or with Brexit, you know, Chequers, no deal, hard Brexit, soft Brexit. You know, really, how do we engage with these terms, and how do we bust the jargon, and how do we explain it? And I think fundamentally that's something that's quite important. But coming back to my breakfast every morning, the reason I get up so early is so I can actually go through the news and see what the trends are and actually join the dots together. And I think as a society, globally, we need to go slower. We need to go deeper. We need to understand fundamentally issues that we're talking about. We need to understand how these issues and our institutions, our opinions, our approaches actually connect together. I mean, I was in Ireland in May for the referendum appealing the 8th Amendment, and what was really quite interesting about that was this was a 35-year-old debate. You know, that people have been debating and talking about and engaging with, and actually it was quite refreshing to see the slow approach and to see people maybe change their views, maybe not have a strong position one way or another, but actually, you know, fundamentally distill it down. I think sometimes in society we go too fast, we move fast and break things, and sometimes we need to go a bit slower. Yes, we can be political disruptors, but first of all we have to understand what we're disrupting.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions on the fourth row. So one is Tim Bale and the other is the lady next to her. So we'll take the lady next to her first. Next to her. Yeah.
So I'm Kate. I'm a student at UAB and also work for a youth charity called UK Youth. And I actually think this question is wrong. So rather than it being how do we engage young people in politics, I think it should be how do we engage politicians in young people? Because actually, I think that young people are involved. They're reaching out and they've got nothing to grab onto. And I think at the moment politicians aren't accountable to young people. A photo on Instagram with a group of young people is not enough from a politician to show that they're doing something. So I guess my question is, how do we give back to the young people? How do we actually represent young people in Westminster, in the House of Commons, and actually stand up for what young people want?
Okay, thank you. Reese?
Did we not start with me? Oh, okay, are we not going back?
I was going to go, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think part of the problem is fundamentally what PRs and political comms people actually think is news isn't actually news. So a politician making a speech or delivering a policy document isn't actually news. An NGO coming out with a report isn't necessarily news. What we're interested in is how is this going to impact people? How is this going to affect people's lives? And I think, you know, sometimes the amount of emails I get on a daily basis of this NGO's released a report, that NGO's released a report, you know, this politician making a speech, that politician making a speech, fundamentally, at the end of the day, nobody really cares. It's about how we make those men in suits or women in suits or just people in institutions relatable to people. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and I think it's probably one of the most relatable speeches I've ever seen. It's Julia Gillard's, I think, 2012 speech in the Australian Parliament about misogyny and about being a woman in politics. And I think fundamentally, a lot of the time, politicians are people. Let's not forget that. Jack, I'm sure, has got his own issues with the housing market in London and, you know, the trains up to Staffordshire on a weekly or daily basis. And I think, you know, we forget that politicians are people, and sometimes actually allowing politicians to speak without the straitjackets of policy announcements or PR opportunities is something that I think can make our politicians a lot more relatable to the people that they represent.
Yeah, I think some politicians do really well at being relatable, and I think that's when they're being themselves. Ellis, you're right, politicians are people too, and we forget that. We see them as pictures on a screen, someone that we can blame everything on, which isn't really reasonable or fair. And I think they're more engaged than we seem to get, in a sense. I remember last year we had James Cleverly come in with our society to come and do a discussion with us. And he listened to us. We spoke to him just as a person, as you do. And I think we do forget that politicians, as you said, are people too. And when you go and have those sort of one-to-one or small group discussions with them, you see a very different side of politicians that you see, you know, on a world stage. I went to a fringe event with Liz Truss yesterday in the Telegraph, and that was really, really interesting because it gave us that opportunity to engage with her and for her to engage with us. So I think that, as well, they've got really busy schedules as well. I know that sounds like an excuse, but we forget that they're busy looking after their constituents and the country at the same time, and of course they need to make time and space for us. But we also need to be aware that there's only so much a politician can do, and while they'll come to us when they can, while they can increase that, we also need to pull them in as well. We had Jacob Rees-Mogg to our society last year as well. That got quite a lot of backlash on campus, but we opened the discussion up, and I think people are engaged. It's just a case of finding the time.
Yeah, and I think you know, young people and more widely today, people are engaging, as we've said, in a whole variety of different ways and non-traditional ways. I think the ways that people engage with politics is very much changing, and I think that's actually quite a positive thing. But politicians do have, and speaking as a politician, have a very important role to engage with you And certainly I regularly go into my local sixth form, which I was a former student of, and local schools, both primary and secondary schools, and I think that is really important that we do have politicians making the time and taking an active role in their communities, an active role in linking into young people, because it is so important that they do engage to encourage young people to be involved in politics, whatever way that may be, and to ensure that they are taking account of the views of this generation.
Reese?
I'm going to have to echo what people have said in this panel, and I only go back to my brother back in East Renfrewshire, which is a Conservative constituency as well, and he knows the MP. I did have to Google just there, but his name's Jack Matterson, who has been into local schools and goes into the local high school where I went to. And that's, I think, the important part that MPs have to do. It's the moment where the cameras are no longer on them when they go home. That's a great way of engaging with politics. But I think I want to pick up on the point that Jack said, and actually I think sometimes the media doesn't actually focus on youth issues with politicians. There's not a lot of conversation happening on HE right now, but come the autumn, higher education might change drastically. We might see a fee change. We might see universities become no longer places of education, but as a place where it's just another aspect of parental supervision. Scary stuff, but yet no one's discussing it because we're too busy focused on the big ticket items. So I would say there that once again, politicians, when straitjacket's off, become real people and do have real agendas to follow. But sadly, I think the media and maybe politicians to a certain degree aren't focusing on sort of the youth issues because sadly we're too busy being distracted by the bigger things like the big B.
Okay. And Tim Bales on that. By the way, the ESRC project I mentioned at the beginning, the stats is from an ESRC project led by Tim Bale, Paul Webb and Monica Poletti. The best thing written on party membership around at the moment. Tim.
Well, I can only endorse that, obviously. My question was actually about political parties. I know that young people engage in all sorts of other ways, and in some ways, political parties are kind of in for a dig for young people. But I wonder if anybody on the panel, it doesn't have to be everybody on the panel, could suggest ways in which parties at the local level, anyway, could encourage younger people to join and to participate and to feel welcome, because if you look at the numbers in the Conservative Party, they're pretty shocking, but they're not actually that good in other parties either. The Labour Party is itself an example. The visuals are all about young people marching down the seafront with Jeremy Corbyn, but actually if you look at the numbers of people who have joined since Jeremy Corbyn come along, lots of them are retreads from the 1980s. They're not young people at all. So it's not just a problem for the Conservative Party, although the Conservative Party has a particular problem. So in other words, how can political parties at the local level create a kind of atmosphere in which young people feel happy to engage?
So should we...
So just quick clarification, when you say engage, that means not getting party membership, but taking part in the party.
Exactly, that might be one way of doing it, yeah.
Amazing. Not being forced to get party membership, and it's the reason why I gave up my SNP party membership. The barrier for me taking part in politics, in a party where I was interested in some policies, but not all policies, was party membership. And you see that with the Labour Party, back in my constituency anyway, and the Conservatives. And it's because there is an older generation that saw that party politics is the way forward and the only way forward. I think this idea of party politics being the only politics needs to change and to create that inclusive environment, because my biggest regret in some instances was getting that SNP membership because I put the blinkers on too quickly. Being able to have open forum events where people can come along and ask questions, I think is a great way of engaging, but I think we have to stop talking about party membership and talking about being open, honest and transparent.
I think particularly it's about having more young members, because more young members bring more young members in, and certainly my association in Stoke-on-Trent, we have probably one of the youngest associations in the country, and that is because we have lots of young members who bring their friends along or whatever. We have social events. We don't just do the usual mundane stuff. So that is how you engage more young people. You actually do things that young people are interested in, and talk about topics, and have debates about things that young people are interested in. And I think that is really the way to do it. And I recognise there are associations out there which are very difficult for somebody of our generation to go into, and if they're all in the 60s, 70s, 80s, it is difficult to get through to that. And I think one of the big things as well for young people, I do agree about membership, and we should encourage young people who just want to be associated or an associate membership. That should be certainly, we should encourage that they don't have to necessarily join as a member, but join as a helper or something like that. And I think but we should encourage people who do want to fulfil the roles within our party and stand for council, as I say, or other things, to be able to do that. Because unfortunately there are too many associations in our party, in Labour and other parties, that don't encourage younger generations to do those roles, and it's about empowering young people to be able to fulfil those responsibilities.
I think in terms of pressure for membership and things like that, I only signed up to get my conference pass. I know that sounds like a probably bad thing to admit today at a conference fringe event, but I didn't feel any pressure to move away from the party. Like, I was proud to be Conservative. I was active on my society on campus, which isn't actually affiliated, but we're still talking about Conservative views. And I think, yes, membership is one way to grab people in, and that does come with time. I wasn't pressured to sign up straight away, but I still was very clear in the fact that I was a Conservative supporter. And I think that, yeah, there are different ways of engagement. Party membership isn't the be-all and end-all. But I know that Young Conservatives, a group that are, I don't know how best to explain them, maybe you could help me out a bit. But they're
a youth wing?
Yeah, they're like the more youth wing of the party at the minute. And I was speaking to a guy from their stand yesterday, and he was saying what we want to engage in is just getting people to come along to our events, get to know what we're about, not force things on you straight away. And that is the way forward, in a sense.
I think party membership is an interesting concept. It really is. I think it's notoriously antiquated, actually. And I think a lot of the time, obviously, when big changes for the Labour Party was obviously when trade union members were no longer signed up, when the trade union levy no longer existed. I think that's a fundamental issue for political parties, actually, the finances question. Because I don't necessarily think political party membership is the most engaging way of engaging anybody in a political party. I think it's like a political straitjacket. And a lot of the time, I think that is a really, really significant issue for a lot of young people, or just a lot of people in general, to be honest with you. Yeah, I've got views on one thing, but my views on the other thing don't really chime. And I actually think one of the more interesting concepts, and one of the things I'd really like to see, is a primary system put in place, so you have constituencies that are more like the US primary system, whereby people can vote, you have open or closed primaries or whatever. But I guess for political parties, that would engage a lot more people in the process and would lead to people becoming a lot more informed, but sadly it doesn't really drive the bottom dollar, does it? Because political parties aren't necessarily going to get the revenue. I think that's a fundamental question. Go on.
Well, it also produces people like Sarah Wollaston, who parties find slightly awkward.
Exactly, and I think, let's be honest, people out there are awkward. People are awkward with their politics. People may have one view that's more in line with the Green policy, one view that's more in line with the Tory policy, one view that's more in line with the Lib Dem policy. And actually, it's about understanding that, maybe party membership isn't the best way forward, and how we can change that. And I think maybe trying to get more people to be members is one thing. I don't think it's a solution. Maybe affiliation, but for me, affiliation is just membership under another name. I actually think trying to open up the debate and have a more open democratic process is something that's fundamentally important. And democratic, not like a polyocracy, which is fundamentally what we are at the moment, but actually putting power in the hands of people, I think, is fundamentally something that's quite important. Anyway, I digress.
I just wanted to respond to that because, I don't think we should think of Conservative MPs, as you've said, or Conservative members as all one group with all the same views. Actually, we are very much I think, particularly in a Conservative Party, a broad church of a range of views, and political parties are about promoting debate and formulating those policies based on that debate. And I think it doesn't, in my view, suppress people having different views and different opinions within a party. And actually, you mentioned about primaries. We've actually had a number of that we're selecting candidates at the moment for a number of seats across the country, and many of them actually have been primaries. So we are trying to encourage that it's not just members who are selecting our future candidates. It is much wider and broader than that.
Okay, we've got just a couple of minutes. I know there are a few people who've been waiting a very long time to ask questions. I know I promised the panellists that we take questions individually, but maybe just at the end we'll group together a few so a few more people can ask questions. This gentleman here has been waiting very patiently.
I'll try and speak quickly. Parties, when making sort of policy and spending decisions, often have to make trade-offs between groups, including age groups. We've said before, young people are the least likely to vote, so they're to my mind, obviously going to lose out in those trade-offs. Also, when you're campaigning, it's often not about convincing people, it's about finding your core voters and getting them out. Do you think, well, mandatory voting, I feel, would address this issue like they have in Australia. Do you think that's a good idea, or are there other dangers which would make it not a good idea?
And we'll take this gentleman here who's also been waiting a very long time.
Hi there. I believe Jack mentioned that he finds policies just aim to just solely attract youth as an insult. Does the panel share this view, or?
Okay. And sorry, could you say that question just one more time, please?
I believe Jack mentioned his viewpoint that he believes policies solely aim to just attract the youth are an insult to the youth. Does the panel share this viewpoint?
Okay,
thank you. And very quickly.
I feel like more representation of ethnic minorities will include more diversity and people who will vote. So why is there no representation, especially in the Conservative Party, of people that look like me?
Okay, so let me just say to the four speakers, if you can just respond to whichever of those you want to. I know huge questions, and also if there's any sort of concluding comments that you want to make, we'll take that as the last round. Reese?
A big thing that the University of Birmingham is struggling with is the fact that BME students are not happy on our campus and have one of the worst sort of so there's a thing called the NSS where they vote on at the end of the year, some of the worst scores in comparison to the white counterparts, and that's because there's actually no representation. They don't see themselves as a part of the university community, and it's something that we at the RSU are trying to identify. That's why I've said the terminology shouldn't be hard to reach, but it's underrepresented. I think sadly in the Conservative Party, people from BME backgrounds are underrepresented because they're not there. And so it's hard to engage because you don't see yourself affiliated with that party. So the one about mandatory voting, yes, God, as a politics student, I'd love mandatory voting. But the problem is in Australia, because I worked with Labour in New Zealand, is the problem that mandatory voting means a lot of people end up don't signing up onto the electoral roll. So it's kind of the trade-off. If you have mandatory voting where you put a $15 fine, well then people just not sign up to vote. Do you make then signing on the electoral roll mandatory? Who knows? It's an interesting question, and I do quite enjoy the debate. Yeah.
I won't answer the second one because that's for everybody else to answer, but in terms of firstly mandatory voting, I wouldn't support that, because I think it's just as we have a choice to vote or vote for a political party, I think people should have that choice to not vote if they don't want to, and I think it is important to our democracy that it is about choice, and I think that would suppress that ability to choose not to vote. So I wouldn't support that personally as somebody who is a Democrat. But in terms of the representation of more ethnic minorities and particularly women as well, actually we've got more elected as Conservatives than ever before. So we have the first Asian Muslim woman as a minister, who's Nusrat Ghani, who's the HS2 minister. We are the only party who's ever had a Prime Minister who's a woman, and now got the second Prime Minister who's a woman. So I'm not saying that we don't need to see more ethnic minorities, more women involved in politics, as I said before. But we do have a number of people who are from those sort of backgrounds who are MPs in the Conservative Party, and it's very important that we do continue to increase those numbers.
I'll start with the mandatory voting one. I don't think it's a good idea. I think going off what Jack said, I think it's rather undemocratic to actually impose that, okay, you're going to be, say, fined if you don't do this. I know people who don't vote on a protest. I do tell them then that they can't then have a go at, you know, certain government policies if they haven't had a say in them themselves. But I do think to impose that would be unfair on people who make it their choice not to vote. In terms of policies aimed to attract being an insult, did you say? Yeah. That's a difficult one, because I want to see stuff aimed at me, and I think if governments are doing it, I think they're doing it for a reason, but they can't just be half-hearted. It can't be a way to grab the vote. I think when they do it as a way to grab the vote, it's insulting, and I think it's fair to say we'd all get rather angry if all of a sudden promises are broken. And finally, on diversity and representation in Parliament, you're right, there does need to be more, but I think that it's something that can't be forced. I know that sounds like a weird thing to say, but I think in terms of representation, it is growing all the time, and there are ways to go.
Right. I think the question of mandatory voting, I have no views one way or the other on mandatory voting. However, I think talking about voting as a single mechanism of input into the creation of public policy is fundamentally misunderstanding actually what generates public policy. Actually, you know, as we were saying, young people are interested in civil society and NGOs and getting engaged in most single issue campaigns and everything like that. And fundamentally, I think if you say, oh, young people aren't interested, well, you know, you look at anti-gentrification movements or the anti-abortion movement in Ireland, or, you know, the tuition fees movement back in 2011, or Tahrir Square in Egypt, or whatever, you actually see that young people and campaigns can have sometimes more of an issue and be another input. I think you've got to look at voting, political parties, and NGOs and civil society, all as inputs that create public policy outputs. And I think sometimes in political science we are too focused on political parties and voting and not focused enough on civil society. I think sometimes politics for young people, yeah, can be a bit of an insult. I think we have to understand young people as citizens, as active citizens. We're really into as multifaceted active citizens as well. We're not just interested in young people's issues, we're interested in housing or healthcare or social care or be what it may be. And I think fundamentally that's something that I think political parties and the news agenda and the media in general fundamentally misunderstand. Now, coming to your question about ethnic representation of people of colour and women and disabled people and LGBT people, yeah, I think that fundamentally is a massive issue. And I think the only way that people can change the structure is to become, this is going to sound very much like one of Pete Carr's Politics 101 classes, but you have to become an agent in that political change, and be that through, you know, an NGO or political party or whatever. We all have this opportunity, and I think part of that problem as well is the news agenda. Is that traditionally the news agenda has been 2 hours, been politician X talking about Y issue. And actually, if we have a more expansive news agenda, we include civil society organisations and, you know, neighbourhood community groups and everything like that, I think you fundamentally get more people on screen who look and sound like me and you.
Okay, thank you very much. A very good comment to finish on, be an agent of change. We may not have resolved everything in this room, but we've at least begun or continued the discussion about it. By the way, very quickly on mandatory voting, if you want a solution to this, you can use what the Russians used in the mid-1990s. I know that Russia is not a paradigm of virtue here, but they actually had a box which was none of the above. That could really shake up the political system.
Or reopen nominations and
no to choose from either.
Well, in that stage there were. I mean, this is the early 1990s. Anyway, as we are a little behind time, I will quickly say 3 thanks. Firstly, again, thank you to Jenny Crisp, Lizzie Kirsch and Eleanor Wolf for all of their organisational efforts in organising this.
event. Secondly, I would like to thank very much the 4 panelists for terrific presentations and engaging in questions. And finally, I'd like to thank you all for coming, for participating, for asking short to the point questions and not giving us speeches from the floor. It's been a pleasure to chair it. I hope you enjoy the remainder of your evening. Thank you and good night.